Coming up on Mountain Hermeneutics, we do a lot of talking about Christianity, but Christianity has a lot of meanings to a lot of different minds. So we're going to break down what are denominations and why the heck do we even have them in the first place. So keep it right here. You're listening to Mount Hermeneutics, where three Marines give their perspective on God, faith, and spirituality with a heavy lean on the divine council worldview. This is not your grandma's Sunday school, nor is it always for the Christian faint of heart. Nothing about who we are or what we say make us experts. But you better believe we'll have a take, and perhaps it won't suck. The majority of the time watching my going on 4-year-old grandbaby. So, gave her own popcorn, watching this child sit at the edge of her seat, commenting. She must be part black because she's just like, I don't even know why. Like, Papa, she didn't even look both ways before she crossed the street. So she just kept talking like, okay, hey, we're
But
pick.
did you shush her though? That's the
No,
question.
no, I should have. I should have like, hey,
You can't. Come on, man. Don't raise her like that. Don't raise her to be one of those people.
we were like, hey,
What do you mean those people?
I mean, those people,
those
the
people
people that talk in damn movies.
So,
I feel like you overpromised a bit, but
hopefully Tom Cruise doesn't come and kick my ass. That's what.
He's only this tall.
Hey, if you're watching right now, remember this show is free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube, simply by searching Mount Hermeneutics. So please subscribe wherever you're watching right now and share the show with your friends and your enemies and anybody else you come in contact with. And if it's your first time watching with us, I am Andre. Those two are my friends, Brian and Matt. And we're happy you're around. So what's up, fellas?
hey, Dre.
Hey.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, guys.
So in Southern California, it's a little known fact that September is the hottest month of the year
Huh.
by a lot. In Oceanside, and this is unheard of, today it was 94 degrees. 94
I don't remember that when I was there.
in my paradise, in my beautiful best weather on earth city. It was 94 degrees. I had to like open windows and turn on the fans and let air blow through, and I was still a little warm and slightly uncomfortable.
It was only 84 here.
Oh man, I can't
That's
wait
really
to
nice.
fly in a couple days. I get
Yeah.
out of this heat
Right?
wave.
You gotta come to Oklahoma for the good weather. I'll take it.
Oh man, so yeah, but not a lot going on though. That's a
Oh, it's
man,
actually gonna be hot when you get here, though.
oh, son of a
Aw.
heck darn dang.
Yeah, it's gonna be 90, 89, 90, 95, 98 when you
Huh.
get here. So much for that idea. You're bringing the heat with you. Damn it, Trey.
Bring, I was always bringing the heat.
Well, we'll probably be in a big, giant, air-conditioned stadium anyway. So,
At least for one of the days.
yeah.
Probably not all the days.
Huh.
we'll just be
Yeah.
indoors. Matt has a pool though, so I think I'm okay.
I do. I do have a pool.
Yeah.
And we can make
Yeah.
use of it.
I've seen it.
Very
I've seen
very
it. I've been
nice.
there.
I seem to only come in the winter time when the pool is not ideal to get into.
It's suboptimal.
Yeah,
Oh.
right. I mean, not impossible.
No, we do it every 1st of January. We do the polar bear plunge.
Ooh,
Are
wee.
there bears? Do you have bears there?
No, this is Antarctica from that regard.
Okay.
So, what's up, Brian? What are you doing?
What am I doing? I can't think of a thing, man. Let me think. Yeah, covers it. I don't have anything
Okay,
going
very
on.
nice.
Yeah.
Right on. Moving along.
Incredible.
Sorry, everyone. I usually try to make something up, but
That's
I
funny.
just my mind's a blank this time.
So
Yeah.
I'm trying to be like Dre, and I'm going to be a grandfather. So that's
That can't be true.
Let's see if the thing will do it. Nope,
We're this.
it's not triggering.
Uh,
That must have just been
Try-
the MacBook thing.
you have to.
It's
You
not
have
doing
to
it.
just do one. You have to do one.
No, I was trying to get the fireworks.
Yeah, I know the black bowl.
Yeah.
Welcome to the party, pal.
Yep. So Alyssa is expecting March 27th.
I just saw her Instagram
Yep.
little real.
Her little montage that she
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
She's so damn dramatic.
With the music and everything. I was like, oh
Hmm.
man, this is okay.
Yeah.
Fun.
What are you gonna do?
I recognize some of the people in there too, so that was fun. Carrie and Terry
Right.
specifically.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. It was. She's quite the little filmographer.
All
Well,
right.
it's
Well,
a good
congrats,
time.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's my big news.
I mean, it makes me feel old, but I
You
don't.
Right.
Well, we're the
The,
same age.
this guy,
So,
this guy
right.
over here.
I don't imagine she takes those things into account though
Not at all.
in her life
No.
decisions.
She
How will Brian feel about this?
right.
Yeah,
I've never heard her say that out loud.
Let her know what I think about that. So yeah.
I'm gonna say there's nothing better. Nothing better.
That's what
So
I'm hearing, and that's
Greg
I'm already starting to have
the bestest.
those feelings. So yeah, my biggest struggle right now is trying to dial in on the best possible grandfather name, because I'm taking the fact that I get to pick very seriously.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah. So we're working through them. We'll see.
Just Matt.
I was there was one I pulled up I googled a list of like top like cool grandfather names, and there was Grandsire was one of them.
Sire. I was about to recommend that one. That's the one I was going to recommend because I watched a lot of Outlander.
They have to kneel or curtsy every time.
Well, I was going to tell him like if he's a boy, he has to do this when he says it. And if he does, I give him money every time he does it. If he walks, he's like, "Grandsire, the pizza has arrived. Here's some money. Go take care of the pizza and keep the change."
That could get expensive.
It'd be worth it. It'd be worth it to have a little army of grandchildren saluting me everywhere I go. Teach the little girls to curtsy.
But you could probably get it for cheaper, though. You could probably just give them candy or something. Or
at first, right, of course.
Anyway,
but as they get older, it'll take a lot as they get older to keep it going, right?
When college dudes come to visit you or whatever, they could grandsire because they need
right.
some cash, right? And you'll have it ready.
But then we were also looking at so my dad Mike chose G-Paw because it seemed more new age, whatever.
Or gangsta. Right. Sounds kind of
so
gangsta.
So the evolution of G-Paw is G-Dog. So Alyssa's really fond of that one and Carrie hates it, which means we'll probably end up with that one.
Right, yeah. I can't imagine Alyssa liking something that Carrie hates. That's
right. Yeah. This is my shocked face.
I mean, that's also like a fist pound greeting too. Like, oh, G-Paw, what's up? Boom.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That means you have to always be super cool.
Right. Like that was the whole point. And that was literally what that one said. It was like for the grandpa with extra swag or whatever. And I'm like,
you can't be lame or
right.
Like BS. Like
right.
you're the place the kid comes when he hates his parents.
Right.
Like,
I'll be the Harley riding 3-plate pressing.
You know what that means, right?
Exactly. That's the whole point.
Got to happen now.
Right.
I mean, that's a must. It is pretty cool being a 3-plate grandfather.
I can't decide if I want to pull the, if I want to start, because I got to come up with a little thing just to aggravate everybody, right?
Right, of course.
And I think I need some kind of variation on the Chael Sonnen's little spiel that he does.
Because
Brian, are you familiar with Chael Sonnen and his silliness?
I have no idea what you're talking about. Is that a sports ball person? Or
he's a fighter.
He's a pugilist.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I do watch some pugilism sometimes, but I don't follow it.
Yeah, he does this little pro wrestling type thing that he says about, I'm too sweet. I'm the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour. He says all these things that rhyme, and it's just this big, long, ridiculous spiel that he does, and it's like it's kind of a throwback to the Nature Boy, Ric Flair, which you didn't watch much wrestling, so you wouldn't know his thing either.
Any wrestling.
I love wrestling.
It's a shame.
Yeah, it's fun stuff.
Just the South Park wrestling.
It's interesting. It's interesting because, pro wrestling, there's a whole bunch of different versions of pro wrestling. There's the WCW, the AEW, the WWF.
The WTF.
How did we get so many pro wrestling divisions like that? How did we get so many denominations to the church?
Good segue.
It's funny because in wrestling it was regional at first, so
Interesting.
maybe there's a tie-in there.
Could be.
So one of you friends want to give a theory or a quick
Well,
rundown historically?
so I was gonna what I was gonna start with is kind of talk about at the super macro level, right? Because there's some high level historical stuff to the different denominations, and I think it makes sense to kind of frame it there, and then we can kind of dig into it, right? So you go back in time, and obviously you had, we're starting with Christianity, right? So we're gonna forget about the Jews for a minute, and talk about the Christian Jews, not the non-Christian Jews. But you had the church, right? So you had the Catholic Church, whether you're going to call it the capital C or lowercase c. And I think that's probably worth getting into to start off with. We've talked about the way that phrasing, that terminology, and we've said it a couple of times and kind of joked on the show and said lowercase c Catholic. But the idea,
I wasn't joking.
Well,
I was deadly serious.
We've said it in lightheartedly, but the idea of the Catholic Church was that it was a universal church, that everybody was under the same banner. It wasn't that everybody was a Roman Catholic, and I think that distinction came up with what we're about to get into. So you go back to, and I don't have the timeline. I should have been even more prepared and had like dates set aside, but at a high level, the splits kind of happened. You had the Eastern Orthodoxy that branched off from the Roman Catholic Church. And Brian or Dre, you guys can fill in some of the detail, but it was largely around the decisions of the Pope and some of the papal decrees and the things that came out of the Vatican. And hyper simplified, a whole bunch of folks out east said, those guys don't speak for us. And they said, you know what? We're done with those guys. And they split. I'm just going to keep.
You want me to break that down, or
let me keep it super simple, and then I'll just keep the flow going.
Gotcha.
So then those guys split, right? So then we had the Eastern guys, and then we had the Western guys, and then within the Western guys, you had a split come up when one of the British kings wanted to divorce his bevy of wives because he couldn't come up with a male heir, and it wasn't Henry the Seventh or the Eighth.
Well, that was Henry the Eighth, but but the Protestant Reformation was already kind of in full swing.
Oh, I missed Martin Luther. Okay, fair.
Yeah, that's
okay. So we had Martin.
I mean,
yeah,
true,
no, that's a good catch. Yeah,
kind of down.
I was thinking about the Catholic part first. That's why I said I should have got the dates ready. So then we had the Protestant Reformation, which had a handful of different things that caused it to split. Not least of which was language. Right. So this is when the church was still requiring everything be in Latin. And there were people that were saying, hey, this needs to be broken apart. And then there was, what was the main driver behind the Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther?
His 95 Theses, which were like, traditionally, people trace the Protestant Reformation. They say October 31st, 1517 was the start of the Protestant Reformation, when Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the door of Wittenberg Church.
You should really pronounce that word clearly that you're saying.
Which one?
95 what?
Theses.
Okay.
Theses. And it was largely about...
So the plural of thesis.
Right, exactly.
It sounds like you're saying feces.
He's nailed shit.
That's what it sounds like you're saying.
Catholics would embrace that.
But
I'm like, a lot of people agree with this.
But there were a lot of precursors to Martin Luther, like John Huss, John Wycliffe. They had a lot of issues with papal authority and just various abuses of the Catholic Church. But it was essentially, I would say that, the main, like, the Roman Catholic Church kind of started to enjoy a monopoly over Christianity, the Bible, in the 4th century with the conversion of Constantine. He didn't make it the official religion, but he favored it. And then Emperor Theodosius made it the official religion of the Roman Empire. So it was basically illegal to be anything but Christian. but then the empire kind of fractured. It kind of shifted to the east. It scattered in the west, but because Rome was such an important city, and the emperors and the Senate had been dissolved, and the emperors had moved east. The Bishop of Rome sort of kind of took on a lot of just kind of by default took on a lot of the roles that the Roman imperial government had, like when the Goths were at the door to sack Rome, it was the Pope who went out and negotiated with them, whereas it would have been the emperor. But it just kind of, this sort of political authority just kind of fell in their lap by default, and then it kind of got institutionalized over time. So then by the time of Martin Luther, they kind of had a monopoly on. I would say that I would always characterize the Protestant Reformation as a political movement first and foremost. We think of it as a religious movement today because we've taken the politics out of religion, but it was really like the Roman Catholic Church was able to impose its will by force. If you dissented from what the Pope said, they would entertain debate a little bit, but eventually, if you don't come in line, they will burn you at the stake. But since they care about you, they don't lead with that. They might torture you into recanting first. But basically, there had been attempts by people like John Huss, John Wycliffe, William Tyndale to translate the Bible into the vernacular. But
there's two other things that are.
Well, mostly the printing press.
I was going to say there was two things: the printing press and syphilis, that had a lot to do with what was going on in Europe at that time. There was a massive syphilis outbreak, and the church kind of jumped on that, like the sexual, the lack of moral rightness, as kind of hey, this is what happens when you fall too far from the word. That was one big thing. That was a huge problem apparently in that time because they didn't understand STDs and whatnot. And then the printing press was huge because up until that point, like you're about to say, sorry, but yeah, it was when I was doing my read, it was like there's two big deals. That the syphilis thing kind of doesn't get talked about a lot, but it was a massive problem.
Yeah, but a lot of monarchs and rulers kind of seized on the Protestant Reformation because it was a way to get out from underneath the thumb of the Pope. So they kind of started all these state churches. But as when you still had blasphemy laws and you still had like the government, just not the Roman Catholic Church as that government. You still had like the Church of England and um, in Geneva, Switzerland, John Calvin was the governor of Geneva. They burned Michael Servetus at the stake for heresy. So you still kind of had that you didn't have that firm separation of church and state really until the American Revolution, but you still had this kind of fracturing of doctrine and institutions and then it just kind of exploded once people came to America. And so, but anyway, I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
That was, that's pretty much all I was going to get there is, the other couple of other people that I thought were important in that period was Erasmus, right? I've brought that guy up a handful of times. He was kind of going along with the printing press thing, and he was a big part of getting the Bible, I don't want to say put into English, but put into the local language, right? Yeah. So that the average lay person could read it. Because it's hard to believe in today's world that once upon a time you could grab a Bible, but you couldn't read it because it was written in Latin and no one was speaking Latin. And unless you were trained to read and speak and write Latin, you were at the mercy of the local clergyman to tell you what was in the Bible. And that's I would also say wild.
That literacy rates, period, weren't as prominent as they are today. Fair. So you could pick up all kinds of things and not know what the heck it says.
But it would be even worse. Somebody could read it out loud and you still didn't know what it said.
and that's kind of it. And that wasn't like the Roman Catholic Church kind of inherited this default monopoly on literacy and scholasticism because all the way back in the first century, most people weren't weren't, you know, they had kind of a functional literacy, but they it was still like they could conduct daily business and sign their name and stuff, but it wasn't, they couldn't sit down and read the scriptures. And you know, only a few people did that, and that's kind of why the centrality of the bishop was so important, and why gathering at the local church house where the scriptures were, and there was the person who was trained to, who was literate and could read them, why that was so important. But as time went on, that monopoly on literacy kind of became institutionalized in the church, and then it came to the point where when somebody like William Tyndale wanted to translate the Bible into the vernacular, well, that's, that threatened their power, and so they had to put a stop to that. And that's when so it wasn't like, in the fourth century it was decreed that only the popes and the clergy are allowed to read the scripture. In fact, the Latin mass, and Latin became the language of the church because it was the vernacular, but then they retained it, and long after anybody spoke it, and then they kind of it just sort of, it came to be the case that only they understood it, and that gave them a certain power that they didn't want to relinquish, but then the printing press kind of forced them to. But
yeah.
So
getting back to the denominations, so by about mid 1500, the mid 1500s, we had started the Protestant Reformation. We had a couple of primary splints. So we had the Lutherans coming with Martin Luther, and we had the Calvinists, unfortunately. So we had those two, and then I'm assuming there was a couple of other smaller splits.
The Methodists.
Well, Methodists came out.
The Methods.
They came from Tyndale, right?
No, they came
or Wycliffe.
They came from John Wesley, who was himself an Arminian. Jacob Arminius was actually a Calvinist. So the Calvinist Arminian thing is kind of an in-house debate, and then Methodists just sort of, anyway, it's
yeah. And then Henry VIII, it's funny that he was actually a defender of the Protestant Reformation, right? So he was actually sending and ordering all of the clergy and whatnot to defend and kind of keep everybody within the Catholic world. And then the Church of England split happened because of him and under his tenure as well. So by the end of the I guess going into the 1600s, our main splits, we had 3 Catholic splits that you'd still call Catholic, talking about the Eastern Orthodoxy, the Roman Catholics, and the Church of England, and then you had the Protestant splits. But then from there to today, we have 50 different Protestant splits. I mean, I don't even know how you would count it, right? But it's a massive number.
Yeah, and it's So
how do we reconcile? I guess there's a lot of questions that come into this, right? And I think, Dre, this is kind of what you were setting up when you were setting the conversation. But one is why, right? Like the how is interesting, and I think the how is worth getting into, but the why is probably why they still exist is a more relevant conversation for today. Because it almost seems like we should snap our fingers and just blend a bunch of these together and get down to 2 or 3, almost like, Brian, sorry for the analogy, but it's apt. It's kind of like college football divisions or conferences. Like we need to get down to 3 or 4 super conferences that actually matter, and then let them battle it out rather than have 40, all these different. We don't need a wacky whack and the NIU and all these, although they just beat Notre Dame. So hell yeah.
You sort of have that happening, and like a lot of churches identify as non-denominational,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
But they still kind of inherit a lot of
similar.
They're Protestant, since they're not Roman Catholic and they're not mm-hmm. Eastern Orthodox,
right?
But
does Church of England still exist?
Yeah, they're Anglicans.
Oh, yeah.
Is it? They're called Anglican in in England. In the United States, they are Episcopalians.
Episcopalians are Church of England.
Right. And
I did not know that.
Presbyterians are offshoots of the Church of Scotland, which are typically, well, they're all Calvinist, but like Calvinism is not a denomination. It's a theological system that is,
it's the highway to hell,
but it's embraced by Presbyterianism.
It seems like
Anglicanism,
we're going to need a Calvinist episode all on its own.
We can do it now.
Just to whet Matt's appetite.
well,
maybe next week. I think it's when we're together. Maybe we can have a Calvinist discussion.
I find myself going back to the epistle to the Ephesians a lot. Like I just kind of dwell there. And I've fallen in love with it largely because like that first chapter, it's so like it's Calvinist's favorite passage. It's one of their favorite proof texts. But when you read it and understand it on its own terms, it's 100% like blows Calvinism out of the water. It's impossible to read it correctly and wind up a Calvinist. But anyway, it might be worth doing a podcast where we just
I think so.
Go through Ephesians, but I'll let you guys ponder that. But yeah, when when a skeptic asks me, well, why are there so many denominations? The answer I give is it's a little bit, I'm much more broad than I am with believers. With believers, I kind of get into it a bit. But my answer is typically, well, it's for the same reason that if you give a classroom full of 50 kids a math test, you're not going to get back 50 identical sets of answers. The reason isn't that math is so subjective and impossible to nail down. It's that some people are better and worse at math than other people. So they don't always give back the right answers. And also, I mean, we have the one Constitution in the United States, but we have, any given person will give a different reading of it.
And it's not even written in as old. It's more recent than the King James version of the Bible, and we can't even agree on what the words mean.
I find,
which, by the way, is a really. Actually, I want to hover on that for a second because I hadn't thought of that. So our Constitution is newer than what is allegedly by a lot of idiots to be the most accurate version of the Bible. I know you don't like the way I just said that, and I don't care. Like my problem is with KJV.
Which part do you think I object to?
Me calling them idiots.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that, but I mean,
no, I'm doing it for effect because come at me. But supposedly,
I agree with the rest.
Supposedly, if everyone was to read the King James version of the Bible, it should be very simple to pull out what it means, and yet it's clearly not for a couple of reasons. But like our Constitution's it's only 200 years old, but it was still written in language that isn't used commonly today, which makes simple interpretations of some of the clauses and phrases challenging.
Yeah,
and in fairness, even if you're attempting to read it cleanly, there's a few of those phrases, the Commerce Clause, I would argue, is really hard to get what the Supreme Court's gotten out of it, and yet here we are.
And at least the Bible gets translated every once in a while to
more modern,
right? Yeah. Where we will not do that with the Constitution because therein lies the problem. Once we start translating it and trying to make it fit to whatever it is that we're saying.
Imagine the fistfights if you tried to retranslate the Second Amendment.
But, I mean,
well, clearly it means this. Well, how dare you? Harump for rump. I didn't get a rump out of this guy.
What I find interesting about denominations is in the military we have a chaplain corps, right? And of the three, there's only 3 Christian chaplains, right? You have Catholic, Protestant, or Orthodox.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing else. That's what you are. So even if you're, say, an LDS chaplain, you're Protestant. That's what you are. And then, of course, there's Jewish, Muslim, and Buddhist chaplains now. I think the Muslims and the Buddhists are fairly new, like in the last 15 years or so.
There's probably a Wiccan too. Is there a Wiccan?
I don't think there's a Wiccan chaplain. I think that's Protestant.
There's probably a bunch of like, I can imagine there's a bunch of Marines and soldiers that wish there was like a Norse chaplain.
Right, yeah. I mean, I suppose you can have a barracks Wiccan guy, right? There, you can put that stuff on your dog tags though, as your religious preference. I
Yeah.
think a guy had Jedi one time I saw it. There was
Yeah, I
a
heard that.
real dagon, stinking friggin' dog tag. Good to go.
It said
So,
Jedi on it.
Jedi, yeah. I think I want to say
Ev-
if I go in MOL, and I might check this tomorrow when I get to work. If you go in MOL, you can actually see
Sort people by their religions.
A Jedi is a thing in there.
I would
I
have to
could be
challenge
wrong.
him to a sword fight.
So, right? Not guess not. I
we
guess you're
used
not
to
a I guess you're not a Jedi.
we used to do that in the barracks.
Yeah.
Got a guy named guy in our barracks had it like a couple of lightsabers, and we'd take them out and just thrash each other. It was
What in the
great.
Star Wars LARPing is going on?
Right.
I mean, I know we're signators and that's nerdy. Um, Mr. Bundy, I'm looking at you. Uh, but yeah, that's wow.
Yeah.
So that's got to be interesting being in the military and being cornholed and or pigeonholed. That's a bad choice of words.
The
Being
military is a
pigeonholed into
cornholing, so it's okay. I think you said it right.
Into such a tight grouping. But sorry, Brian, you were starting to go somewhere with it. But you know, I think that one of the biggest challenges, the way I see it, is that all of these offshoots have created a lot of theology, and they've created a lot of theological differences that now these people are what's the right word I'm looking for, tribally bound to or legalistically bound to,
Well,
or
tribalism that's a pretty good.
I think so.
That was
Yeah.
kind of my point last week when I was talking about just, you know, bottom line, what God do you believe in,
Right.
right? Because the and then later on, and my point was once Christianity or Jesus won the day of the most popular God for the Western world,
Mm-hmm.
that that was no longer the question. Now all of a sudden we start getting into our theologies and which one of us
Mm-hmm.
is correct.
Yeah.
And then the talk about salvation. And if you don't do your theologies properly, then you don't have salvation. And then, once are you saved? I don't know. I'm saved. Are you saved? I don't know. I'm saved.
Well, something as simple as baptism, right,
Yes.
has taken on. You mean there's religious sects across Christendom that will get into like wars over it. There probably have been wars fought over baptism, right? I saw a video, it was really cute, of a kid that was afraid of water and nobody told the pastor, and he's being baptized, and it's in an old school baptismal. And so he's, got the kid and he's supporting his head, and he's, talking, and he takes his hand and the kid instantly like reaches out and grabs a hold of the glass, like the railing, right? He's holding on. The pastor's like, and so he like
Water.
he yanks his hand off and like dunks him, right? And the kid's fighting him. And he stands him up and he's like, "Hey, you're okay. I had to do what I had to do. You're good." And he goes, "Here, take this." But because the kid had fought him so much, he has like the rag that they give him to put over their head, but it got wet. And he goes, "Just to make sure." And he puts it over his head and squeezes it. Which, for those that don't understand, there's a difference of full submersion versus being sprinkled, and there's like a big break there. And so this pastor was like kind of jokingly saying, "I want to make sure I got the top of your head fully wet so you were fully submerged so that the baptism was real," which I have different thoughts on that aren't worth getting into on this episode. But
they might be, but
there might be worth getting into.
I
mean, the spirit. My point is, the spirit and intent was there, right? And if the kid wasn't like legalistically fully submerged, but the intent was to fully submerge him, he was submerged. And there's no part of me that thinks the Holy Spirit's going to go, we were going to do the whole redemption thing, but we're not going to now, right?
What is it that makes a baptism, which is itself symbolic?
That's also my point.
What makes a symbol real? It's of course the meaning that you assign to it, and that's kind of, that kind of I have a little TED talk, a little miniature TED talk in my head that applies to this, but I'm not sure.
That's what I was getting at. We could go into a bunch of different directions. Like if the kid's ability to overcome his fear and accept the baptism, was he really submitting to the baptism? Does it have to be legalistically complete? Does it matter? Like him, he did the public profession, and that's the point of the baptism. So
I don't
there's
think
a whole
that's
bunch of different concepts at play there.
People that never get baptized at all, but come to the
I saw another
realization
video of a
that
dude in a
Christ is
prison
real.
that got baptized in a 50-gallon buck
yeah, I saw
in a
that.
drum, and the dude had to like basically jump on top of him and like drop the atomic elbow on him to get him
Smash him in there.
underwater.
It seems more like hazing than it
Right.
does some
I,
religious experience. But I
I
think a lot of hazing is religious experience, isn't it?
the public declaration is kind of incidental to the baptism. I mean, you can have a legit baptism that's not in public, or it's not a. It's. I mean, that's kind of what we call it, but that's part of the overall. That's part of the overall issue of. So, yeah, I was kind of on the fence about whether to even get into this, but I think it's pertinent. I've been reading Jean Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation, um, which is a very dense, overwrought book, but it makes a lot of valid points. And since they made a movie out of it, I figured it's enough of a pop culture reference that I could get into this. You guys know about the Simulacra and Simulation, right?
We talked about it last week.
Okay. On the show?
Mm-hmm. Or maybe week before last, but yeah.
Okay. Well, it makes an appearance in The Matrix. In fact, the Wachowskis would say that The Matrix is based on that book. Jean Baudrillard hated The Matrix and disagreed that they captured his philosophy, but it's in the beginning when people knock on his door, he come he's got some bootleg programs he made for them, and he pulls a book off of his shelf. And the book is Simulacra and Simulation, and he opens it up, and it's hollowed out. It's just a box, which is kind of a funny joke because that's kind of the point of the book. The reason I think this is important is that it's a treatise on postmodernism, and postmodernism is basically what we're talking about when we ask about different denominations. I would say postmodernism is a result of our denominational fracturing. We don't usually think of it that way, but that's largely because it's not often talked about how central Christianity has been to Western culture. I mean, it's kind of one of those obvious things that like we know, but to the culture at large, they act like it's just this one influence among many, and that we've progressed by leaving it behind. But really, it's politics is downstream from culture, culture is downstream from religion, and the fact that we used to have this one religion that united Western civilization, and then it's kind of fractured with the Protestant Reformation, with the Enlightenment, with the American Revolution, secularization. We've kind of lost that common truth. So postmodernism is the idea that there is no objective, transcendent, universal truth. Everybody just has their own kind of localized meta narrative, and they're like nobody's meta narrative or worldview or outlook is more or less valid than anybody else's. And of course, that's why it's wrong to say my religion is right and yours is wrong, according to popular culture. Um, and that's largely a reflection of all of the denominations that there are, but it also perpetuates the proliferation of denominations. So what I mean is, are you guys familiar with Baudrillard's philosophy at all? It's okay if you're not. Most people have.
Not by those words. When you say the philosophy, I might be familiar with it.
Well, like he's kind of considered one of the foremost commentators on postmodernism, but So the title of the book, Simulacra and Simulation, he he kind of he starts off by making the observation. There was this short story named by somebody named Borges in France. I think it was in France. Maybe it was Italian. It doesn't matter. But the point is, the short story. It's about this empire that has these map makers who they make a map that is so vast and comprehensive that it perfectly represents the empire, so much so that it's the size of the empire. And so there's kind of they kind of lose sight of which is the map and which is the actual territory. And there's such a confusion that as the empire breaks down, as it fractures and they lose territory, the map itself frays. And he kind of uses that as an allegory for our modern culture. It used to be that culture, you had paintings that were simulations of real life. They were copies of reality. Same with plays or sculptures. But with the invention of photography and then mass media and video, we were so inundated with simulations of reality that are so lifelike that we lose sight of what the reference is and what the symbol is. Kind of like if you grow up on TV, I mean, there's a sense in which, yeah, we understand that I'm not in a TV show, but the way that art imitates life and life imitates art, the fact that we're so inundated with culture, and so much of our culture, it's referencing other culture, that the copies, it's not a copy of real life anymore. It's a copy of other simulations. And so we've gotten to the point where our sense of reality, it becomes what he calls simulacra, which is it's a copy without an origin. And Baudrillard he's a nihilist so he's an unbeliever. Of course, he doesn't believe in God. One of the examples he uses for simulacra is um, icons of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Basically, he attributes motives to the iconoclasts. It's better if I read this. It'll be short. One can see that the iconoclasts, whom one accuses of disdaining and negating images, were those who accorded them their true value, in contrast to the iconolators, the people who worship the icons, who only saw reflections in them and were content to venerate a filigree god. On the other hand, one can say that the icon worshippers were the most modern minds, the most adventurous, because in the guise of having God become apparent in the mirror of images, they were already enacting his death and his disappearance in the epiphany of his representations, which perhaps they already knew no longer represented anything, that they were purely a game, and that it was therein the great game lay, knowing also that it is dangerous to unmask images since they dissimulate the fact that there is nothing behind them. So that's his view of religion, that it's basically a simulacra. And there are different stages of simulation that lead to simulacra, but it's which might be useful for further discussion. But in the interest of streamlining this, the fact that we're Christians, we're Westerners first by default. We might come into Christianity, and ideally our Christianity will, everything else would be subordinate to our Christian faith, but that's not always the case. And we're going to evaluate our religion through our cultural understanding. And so, you might be wondering what this has to do with the church. So, if we're speaking of the church in terms of simulation and simulacra, every believer, everyone who truly believes in their own denomination, ideally we think of ourselves as the church. We identify with the first century church that we read about in the New Testament. But everybody who is, and we kind of see other churches as simulations rather than the original. Like they're simulating that, but they're not getting it quite right. Whereas we are the original. Or if we want to be more humble about it, maybe we acknowledge that what we're doing is a simulation, but we're striving to make it the most accurate simulation as possible. But if you're an unbeliever, I mean, if we're defining the original church in biblical terms, what we mean is that body of believers who witnessed the risen Jesus, who were filled with the Spirit of God, and who, in the power of God, spread the gospel and advance the kingdom of God on earth. If you're not a believer, then that church doesn't exist. That's a myth, and whatever we're doing today, accurately or inaccurately, is merely a simulacrum or a simulacrum. You guys follow so far?
I think I do. Let me use a couple of analogies to dumb it down. So one example, I'll use a pop culture reference, which is keeping in theme with your simulacra and simulation. Ready Player One. So it's an environment where people were living more in the alternative universe, the alternate reality, and the world was falling apart around them, but they were living in this memorization. The real world sucked,
so they went into a fantasy world.
And then to bring it into the church idea, I shared a meme in our chat group the other day. And it basically it's a meme, so it's not designed to be theologically solid, but it says,
so calm down, Brian, don't pounce.
But it says fallen angels becoming demons and Satan desiring a kingdom in hell is not in the Bible. That comes from Paradise Lost.
Yeah, perfect.
And so I think that's actually a great example here, because most Christians think that that's in the Bible. Well, show me in the Bible where it says that, right? Like, show me where, that's what's actually going on. But we know, if you actually, have read Paradise Lost and understand that that's where this mythology comes from, and somehow it crept into our traditions. That is the church, that most churchgoers talk about things in those terms.
Yeah,
and that's actually terrifying. It's not.
You want to be even more scared?
Well, that's your disembodied spirit argument that we make every week,
Sure,
right?
Sure. Yeah. But that one's kind of invented out of thin air, at least. It's not like it came from a fiction book that's not about the Bible. You know what I mean?
It came from Gnosticism and every other religion in the world. Every other religion in the world has that belief in going away to Valhalla or Elysium or some afterlife as a disembodied spirit.
Yeah.
But which is another great example, but probably the scariest, to your point, the scariest thing is, like, if you ask your garden variety Christian, why do you believe this stuff? Like, why do you believe, for example, that Jesus rose from the dead? The answer you're likely to get is, well, because that's where my faith is. That's what I put my faith in. Which basically which is, of course, is not an answer. That's a restatement of the question. But if we unpackage that, well, what do you mean by that? Well, I'm a Christian. That's my cultural identity, my tribe. One of the features of being a Christian is that I have faith in God. So when I hear about the resurrection of Jesus, well, my faith in God says that happened. Says I believe that. Would you guys agree with that? That would be a pretty common response.
Yeah.
Am I being fair in that characterization?
Yeah, I think it's pretty fair.
Right. Well, that's not how the Bible teaches it. That's actually the opposite of what you find in the Bible. In the Bible, a wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but no sign will be given it except the sign of Jonah, which of course is his resurrection. that's the sign that God is going to give humanity in order to believe. And you see that in Acts 17 when Paul is addressing the Athenians at Mars Hill. He talks about how God divided the nations and determined the time set for them, and he has set a day when he would judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to all men by raising him from the dead. So the resurrection is God's proof that he's going to judge the world with justice by Jesus Christ. You see the same point in 1 Peter 1:20 or 21. He says that through Christ, you believe in God who raised him from the dead and gave him glory so that your faith and hope are in God. As in, basically he as a historical event within time and space and human experience, God raised Jesus from the dead to be his proof of himself to the world. And that's how the first Christians spread Christianity so far and so wide within one generation. They got people who were had thousands of years of deeply entrenched cultural and religious loyalties. They turned their back on that at great cost because they persuaded them that this actually happened. Jesus actually did rise from the dead. God raised him. And for that reason, they put their faith in God. Like, the resurrection is not the object of faith. We don't believe that because we have faith in God. We have faith in God because we believe that. But when we flip it, when we say, I believe in that because I have faith in God, and a lot of denominations, they treat faith itself like it's the miracle. Like Calvinists teach that you cannot believe unless you are first regenerated. And not just, a lot of people believe that who don't identify as Calvinists, but Calvinists are the ones who kind of, it's a formal doctrine that they hold to. Everything else about Calvinism kind of revolves around that ordo salutis, that order of salvation, that you have to be regenerated first in order to believe. And what we wind up doing by that is we take the resurrection like outside of the realm of objective reality. I mean, God did it as a historical event, so that, like all historical events, it could be verified or falsified with investigation. Like, nobody would say they believe in the moon landing because they have faith in NASA,
or the government, yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Or the Holocaust, or the JFK assassination, or the Civil War, or anything else. They believe it based on the evidence because there's, people, there are eyewitnesses at the time who reported it and wrote it down for us, and we understand history. That's a component of the historical narrative that we understand based on evidence. Well, the resurrection is the same thing, but when we take it out of that and we make that the object of faith and treat that faith as if that's the miracle, well, what we're doing is we're turning it into simulacra. Like, it's no longer, it's not even there's not even an original church to simulate anymore. We've kind of turned the whole thing into simulacra. It's basically a social construction. It's valid. We act as if it's our faith. We don't say that. Nobody would ever say that because that's blasphemous. But the way that we're acting is, it is our faith itself that validates the belief. It's not valid on its own, and we discover that validity and thereby respond in faith.
So it's essentially, what is a woman?
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. Like the transgender movement is exactly in line with this thinking. And this is why I say that postmodernism, it's directly tied to the proliferation of denominations. The proliferation of denominations comes from, well, it's kind of a chicken or egg thing. Before the Protestant Reformation, we're kind of in the state that Israel was in the book of Judges. In those days, everyone did what was right in their own eyes because there was no king in Israel. What you laughing at, Dre?
He's laughing at my facial reaction to what you just said. That was a circle.
Yeah.
You said we're like in the days of Judges, and I'm like, ancient Near Eastern, what? Okay, but I get it. I don't.
Well,
I get your point, and that was we talked about that. I think last week or the week before as well. The that quote that I pulled out of the Brian Godawa book was that whatever it is that whatever is the common belief system in a land is its God, right? And
right.
that aligns to what you just said. Yeah.
Well, but in the book of Judges, it was kind of setting up that like why Israel needed a king.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we kind of the church sort of had a king in the person of the Pope,
Mm-hmm.
but like in ancient Israel, having a king didn't solve their problems. Like much of the rest of the biblical narrative,
Because men are flawed and that leader becomes flawed, and then that flawed nature trickles down into its people. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Catholics will, point to the Protestant Reformation as a great evil that has befallen Western civilization. I'm reading this book by a Catholic about the occult roots of feminism, and she doesn't identify herself like she's not explicitly a Catholic, but it kind of comes out wherein she blames the Protestant Reformation on the rise of feminism and other occult ideas. But there's a statement in there that
I can kind of see that.
well, it is kind of true, but I think she overstates the point. A lot of occultism was underground Christianity, like in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and Enlightenment period. It was because you get burned at the stake if you dissent from the Roman Catholic Church, so it's secret. John Dee thought of himself as a devout Christian, but he's also like the most famous, wizard in human history. But there's a line in there that I've often
I
heard
think
from
that's
Catholics.
Crowley, but we're splitting hairs.
Well, Crowley. Okay, so anyway,
did Ozzy Osbourne make a song about John Dee? I rest my case.
Okay. Well, Crowley would credit John Dee with
Of course. I said popular. I didn't say the beginning.
Okay. Anyway, there's a line in there about, or this is what happens when you let people interpret the Bible on their own, which
Right.
It is right, but the alternative isn't any better. I mean, it's having one person who interprets it for everybody and can burn you at the stake if you dissent. Well, that doesn't guarantee the right interpretation.
That's how you get the Spanish Inquisition.
Nobody expects it, but
that's what happens.
It's totally predictable.
Yep.
But yeah, that just guarantees everybody shares the error of that one person, and also it guarantees that person doing the interpreting, they're going to interpret it in a way that reinforces and preserves their own power, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And so the answer cannot be a top-down authoritarian interpretation, but it also can't be, we can't
every man for himself. There is no rules. There's no right answer.
Because there's still truth. So
right. But we it's not an easy answer. I think it's well, one, recognizing that much of what we call Christianity it's a simulacrum. I mean, it's ugly, and nobody likes hearing me say this, but we kind of have to discredit the mainstream church in order to get people to look deeper, in order to understand. Like, we need apologetics. We need an epistem. We can't treat faith like an epistemology, like a way of knowing things. Faith is a response to what we discover by reason and evidence. We need an objectivist Christianity, and there's no way to force it. There's no way to impose it from the top down. You can't. It doesn't matter how many public school systems put the Bible in classrooms. It's not gonna change the overall culture, because we still have this understanding of faith that is purely subjective, and we treat it like it turns into a kind of a Gnostic mystery religion. Like there's no, you can't, the church is supposed to be the instrument for passing on the truth through, making the case for the resurrection. Instead, we just sort of, we we indoctrinate people. We kind of spread it through, tribalism and cultural inculcation, and teach them that faith is private and personal and subjective and self-defined. But that's what's led to that's reinforced the postmodern relativism that has led to transgenderism and all kinds of other just whacked out ideologies that are destroying the country and our whole civilization, really. Um, but
Dre, you were about to say something.
Oh, I don't remember. I did.
Sorry.
I think it had to do with just the ability to have the freedom of speech. I think that's why religion's kind of put into that First Amendment. So you can actually debate these things, so that I can have a podcast and put it out on YouTube, and I can say stuff and someone can disagree with me and we can come to an understanding by by speaking the reason and logic that Brian is speaking about. Um, I'm not afraid to be wrong, and that's okay. And I think that also lends to people with lots of power that don't get to keep it. I mean, there's a reason why, in the antebellum South, they didn't let slaves read the Bible. They wouldn't even teach them to read at all. So if you're able to read, then that gives you some kind of power, because you're able to think and see and watch things that come in that's outside of your bubble.
Right.
So they taught versions of Christianity that only talked about slavery, right? And how you're supposed to, be good to your master, because in the end there is no slaves, right? So just be a good slave right here, and then you'll get to the afterlife. Don't worry about it, Negro, right? So I say all that was kind of the fear. If you have the Protestant Reformation, but without that, then we were just stuck in that top-down authoritarian falsehood. um that's all.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it kind of, there was another point I meant to include in my little opening monologue there, but you know, if we're thinking about the church in terms of, simulations that reflect the original versus simulacra in which there is no original, I think a lot of people they're not even necessarily thinking in those terms when they choose a church. They're not thinking, is this the best reflection of the church I see in the New Testament that existed in the first century? It's often more about, does this suit my preferences? Does this meet my needs? Is the worship music as I want it to be? Um, of course they might make the argument, well, my preferences are what the Bible says they are. Um, but we have this kind of, popular Western way of coding the language that we read in the Bible. Like you read about faith. Um, if to you faith means an alternative to reason and evidence, or an alternative to good works, um, well, you're not getting the meaning of it that they intended in the that was intended by the writers. Faith it's not an epistemology. It's not a knowledge claim. It's a relationship orientation. And but it's that kind of, you know, we have the simulation version of Christianity that we bring to the Bible, and that's typically informed by our upbringing and by our, the cartoons we watch. Like I wasn't raised in church, but I was raised on Looney Tune cartoons, and I remember Sylvester the cat having a piano fall on his head, and then his nine cat lives with angel wings and robes went up to heaven to play harps on clouds. And that's the kind of cultural expectation that I got when I first became a Christian and read into the Bible. It took me years to realize, well, that whole thing about dying and going to heaven as a disembodied spirit. It's not in there anywhere. I got that from Looney Tunes and other pop culture, and which is an example of what Baudrillard was talking about. We have where so much of our culture is simulations of simulations that we've lost sight of reality, and we live in hyper reality.
So kind of like the strawberry candy, right? Kind of that same deal where strawberries taste a certain way, but then as you start making strawberry flavor, people forget what a strawberry actually tastes like, and they taste the strawberry and like, well, that's not good because it's not
it doesn't taste anything like that.
It's not fun and
that Starburst that I just ate.
It's not a soda. So
this doesn't give me diabetes. This is good.
Yeah. What is this?
In fact, fun fact, there have been no clinical studies to prove that you can get diabetes from only eating fruit.
Correct.
It takes concentrated effort to get diabetes.
But once you get it, fruit
doesn't help the case after the fact, no, because it is in fact sugar, but your body produces fructose in a very different way.
It's kind of like the war on salt, right? Salt and sodium causes your blood pressure to go up, but the only reason it does that is because of what sugar already did and destroyed your system.
I remember being in the Marine Corps and we're talking to my corpsman about being hydrated. And he was like, listen, you want to know the best way to stay hydrated? You know that salt packet they give you in your MRE? Eat it. Put it on your MRE and consume that salt because it'll make you thirsty and it'll help your body consume the water. And I was like, isn't that bad for like my blood pressure? He goes, what are you, a 50-year-old overweight black guy? He's like, why are you worried about your blood pressure? And I was like, oh, no. He goes,
and real quick, there's a couple of factors that cause high blood pressure. And one of them is melanated skin, because you don't actually absorb
vitamin
the
D
UV rays the same, and vitamin D is something that helps regulate your blood pressure. So the whole, stereotype of dark people having higher blood pressure, it's because they're dark people, and they don't process vitamin D the same way. Fun fact: black people have high blood pressure because they are in the sun.
Well, it's also all that purple drink didn't help.
Well, the diabetes, that's
I was about to say
fried food, but that's cultural, not genetic.
They weren't born to drink a bunch of purple drink. That was that was culture that told them to drink it. Yeah.
I wasn't trying to take a racist lens. I was just saying that biology.
No, I get it.
Matt.
No, I'm with you. I'm supporting
Oklahoman white people, I swear.
Somehow I'm the bad guy for agreeing with you. I see how it is.
He's Asian, so don't paint all of us white people.
I got 99 problems, but sickle cell ain't one.
It's right.
So did we solve denominations?
No. I wanted to come back around to a couple of things. So what we solved is simulacrum and simulations. We didn't solve how it relates specifically to the denominations. So we briefly talked about the history and kind of the hows and the whats, and I think your point about political angles is apt, but no longer. And I think that's part of the interesting thing, right? So that environment no longer exists because of the separation of church and state.
Yeah, it's easy to have unity when
you're forced to.
When the chief religious authority is pointing a sword at everybody.
Right, when he's also the governor or whatever the political power structure might be.
Catholics would rebut that the church did not execute people. They only pronounced people guilty of heresy, and then the local government executed them.
Yeah, I think if I'm being burned at the stake, I don't really care about the semantics of who's lighting the torch.
Well, that sounds a lot like, well, Your Honor, I didn't pull the trigger. I just hired the hitman.
Right.
I mean, if I'm a deer and I spot a little brook and I put my lips in a clear water, I really don't care the color or the type of pants the guy shot me, what he's wearing. I just don't.
For those that don't know, that's a very slow burn My Cousin Vinny reference. For anybody that didn't catch that, I recommend you go.
I've been watching
a
lot of Billions lately, and they have nothing but pop culture references through the entire thing.
Yes. Also, Suits. Suits was that way also, though. So you kind of went from one to another.
That's what Baudrillard was talking about, how the simulations are referencing other simulations, and
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes total
Yeah.
simulacra.
So watching a
Does
movie
it?
like Mallrats where they're having an argument about superheroes is, and then making a reference about Mallrats while they're arguing about superheroes, which is comic books, is, a really good example of that. But so Brian, you mentioned the non-denominational, right? Like that's kind of the new version of the newest denomination, which is a denomination without a denomination. But even within that, I mean, we've got, you know, I mean, you've got Church of God, you've got all of your what are they called? The shoot, what's the category for like the Pentecostals and the
Charismatics.
the charismatics? You have the charismatic subset. You've got the kind of what are the old school ones like the Mennonites and the the
high
primitive.
high church,
Yeah, the ones with, women have to wear dresses
traditionalist.
and boys can't cut their beards and all that kind
Those
of
are
stuff.
like Amish
Yeah,
people.
The
yeah,
Quakers and
Mennonites,
whatnot.
yeah, Quakers, yeah. But you've got that. There's a Baptist version of that down here in the South. They pull out the rattlesnakes and whatnot. I guess they're kind of both. They're charismatic also. But we're still continuing to fracture into all of these subcategories, and I think a lot of it, Brian, you talk about the marketplace, and I think some of that drives it, right? Because you've got all of these different emotional needs and these social needs. But what's crazy to me, and I mean crazy in the clinical sense here, you have this marketplace, market drivers that are building and empowering and causing splits in new denominations, but the theology is continuing to evolve within these denominations, right? Or getting looped back around on itself. It's not as if there's only like a core theology and it's just people are embodying it differently. Like they actually take on these different things that matter and things that don't matter, right? I'm trying to think of a good example of one that I'm aware of. So I'm aware of I call it a primitive Baptist church, but it's a Baptist church that's very old school. Women have to wear dresses down to their ankles and all that kind of stuff, right? But they've adopted the no birth control of the Roman Catholic Church that essentially like no mainstream Protestants adhere to, right? And I thought that was weird. It was like, are we looping back around to the beginning? Like you're just going to become a Catholic all over again? You're going to put all of these old school requirements and beliefs into your thing until you've gone back to the beginning. I find that interesting. That's one example. I guess the question or discussion point that I'm trying to bring up is like, is there an end to this, or is there any? I don't want to ask the big like philosophical, like what do we do to fix it? Like that's a silly answer, a silly question. I know there is an answer, but it's not like something that this show is going to help anybody understand. But I'm just from a rhetorical question point of view, my thing is like, where is the end from the fracturing from a theology point of view, not from a behavior or social tribal point of view, right?
Well, I disagree that we won't be able to provide an answer. I think the answers are there. But as far as where it ends, I mean, I agree that as long as we have this idea that faith is subjective, that it's this Gnostic mystery, this mystery religion where whatever your subjective feelings validate as preferable, and it's beyond the realm of you can't challenge or scrutinize it. Then yeah, we'll never come to any agreement, and people will always, you know, remake God in their own image. That's essentially what we're doing. We when we shop around for religions that suit us, we're basically looking to worship ourselves writ large, Um, and I mean that you have that in the so-called progressive church. You have people insisting that God is just totally gung-ho zealous for LGBTQ ideology. That you guys have seen those woke preacher clips that I share sometimes. Um, where they remake the creed to reflect transgender ideology. The Rainbow Creed, I think they call it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's as there's just as human depravity can just take on endless different iterations. If we're worshiping ourselves writ large, then there's no end to that. So I don't know if that answered your question or just added to your or just reiterated the question, but
I think it reiterated it. I mean, yeah, that's Trey.
I don't know. I think I mean if I were to go to the different churches that are just in my little neighborhood or within my city, I guess I would just have some simple questions on what is the I mean, because all the things that are on the peripheral are things that would just be things that would suit my social needs. Do I like the music? Do I actually like the dude that gives the talks? Are the people that go there, they have the right, I don't know, vibe for lack of a better term. But if the theology is sound and the one down the street has the same sound theology, a lot of times, I mean, what I guess when I was if I'd be investigating, what is the actual difference? Does the
That's
church have a
yeah.
creed, right? Does what is the difference? And as long as to me, as long as everything is not I don't not everything, but just the basics and the fundamentals of what salvation is and what worship is, then I'm not sure that all these denominations matter. I just don't.
well, but if the thing that unites them is something that we all agree upon is not in the Bible, like if the
No, I
if
understand that point. I understand that point, but so that would be a basic question, right? What does faith mean to you? Cool.
and what
Right
does
answer.
salvation mean?
I'll stay. What is what?
Salvation,
Sure.
is it going to heaven as a disembodied spirit? I mean, here's the thing: like you can ask your garden variety Christian preacher about salvation, and he'll say, faith in Jesus Christ. So for salvation by grace through faith. But if what he means by faith is this, the Calvinist version where you have to get it, that's the miracle itself. And then the outcome of that is you go to heaven when you die instead of hell. Is that Christianity? Is that the original church that we're supposed to be emulating, or is that a simulacrum? Is that a and if those common beliefs define the majority of churches that you're likely to find out there, well, I think the question is, in what sense does the church even exist anymore?
Well, so hang on. So we've touched on this conversation slash argument a couple of times, and I understand what you're saying, Brian. Where I think I disengage from you or disagree with you is, let's use something really simple.
Okay.
The Trinity.
Okay.
If a church, a person, whichever way you want to describe it, held all of the basic beliefs fully and I'm going to use the word perfectly, and I'm meaning biblically perfectly, not whatever, but like if they understood the resurrection, they understood, and they let's say they checked every box that you're going down the list, right? But they're non-Trinitarian, not because of the Father, Son, but because of the Holy Spirit. does all of the other marks not count or not work?
Well,
Is the concept of, and I mean, just this is a nitpick, right? But like, that's something that the average Christian would go, what do you mean you're not a Trinitarian? If you don't believe in the Trinity, you can't be a Christian, can't you? Like, and my point is I don't want to turn this right now into that. Maybe we should have that conversation, and we could argue on a day that we feel like fighting. But my point is that when you pick a nit and then you say, well, if you don't believe in this, are you even a Christian? Well, like at some level,
is that what I've done?
well, you just did when you said, well, what about if they don't believe in heaven? If they believe in heaven as a disembodied spirit, then does the church even exist? You had a couple of ifs in between there, but my point is,
but that's not a nit though. And like,
is it?
Well, the mission of the church is to advance God's kingdom here on earth.
Yes. Right.
And to bring it back to the divine council worldview, like if we have a set of beliefs that by which we define Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
that it instead of that, that active, mission to transform the world, to advance God's kingdom on earth, and to make every effort to add to our faith those qualities consistent with the divine nature, to empower people with knowledge and teach them and initiate them into Christianity by teaching them why it's true, teaching them how to grow in the divine nature, and how to make new Christians. That's a very different sense of mission and purpose, and that's a different religion than what we find. It's not that churches are doing that, and then on top of that they teach about going to heaven instead of hell as disembodied spirit. It's that's the whole objective of churches.
Well,
it's passive, and it's insular, and it's internally focused. Like the world is going to hell in a handbasket around all around us, and most churches are not even addressing that, or they're just kind of hiding in their conclaves, talking about how to go to heaven.
Agree with all of that, but my point is, an organization, a person, a church could be doing all of the things you just said and simply have that one check mark wrong. And that doesn't invalidate all of the other things, is what I'm trying to say. There's a couple of those check marks that I would agree are non-negotiables.
Well, let me address that. Well, one, I think the question itself presupposes that what you believe, like the specific doctrinal correctness is the measure of one. I think that if you have the right mindset, if you have the what I would call objectivist Christianity, where it's predicated on reason and evidence, and faith as a response to what you learn about the resurrection, if you're initiated by way of apologetics, critical thinking, I don't think that would be an issue, for one thing. I don't think that the issue is not, like, I don't disqualify somebody as a Christian if they don't believe all of the same things I do. But if you've gone wrong on doctrine, I would argue that it's because you've put your faith in something, and your faith is in something other than God. Your faith is in your institution. Your faith is in your theological system. There's some kind of prejudice that you brought to it that's blinding you to something that the Bible clearly teaches. The issue is not, your beliefs don't line up perfectly with mine. I might be wrong on something, but if I'm challenged on the thing I'm wrong about, and I'm shown why I'm wrong, but I won't move from it, well, my faith is misplaced. My commitment is not to trusting God and obeying the truth wherever it might lead. There's some idol getting in the way. That's the issue. And I would say that we have, the overall issue with denominations, One, I think, big picture, if we, reading the New Testament and its emphasis on unity, there's one Spirit, one baptism, one God and Father of all. We should, we shouldn't be at ease with the fact that there are so many denominations, for one thing. But I'm kind of getting off of your point, but it's sort of, but the question that you asked, though, I think it's just predicated on the wrong assumptions. I don't think it's a matter of you have to check all these boxes of doctrine, and then that's the thing that determines whether or not you're a faithful and functional Christian. Those things are symptoms. Checking these things off, checking off all the right boxes is an outcome of being a faithful and functional Christian, but that not checking one of them is not the issue itself. If that makes
no,
sense.
I agree with that. I agree with that completely. And not exactly sure how that tied into the argument, or the discussion, but
my answer or your question?
No, I don't remember how to, the point that I was trying to bring up was just that I was actually responding to what Dre said, but
and,
it was,
and really, what I said was, if there's a baseline of all the things that is true about Christianity, and a church has them, and the only difference is on the peripheral, I don't care what they call themselves.
right.
Like that was my point. And then you say, well, what if this, what if that? I'm like, well, the what ifs that you gave me, Brian, are the basic questions that I would ask.
Right.
Wait, me or him?
You, Brian.
You're
Brian, right? I don't know where I'm pointing down. That's what, but you said, well,
you're over here to me.
Are they
Matt's
saying that
down
you go
there.
to church, you go to heaven as a disembodied spirit? I'm like, well, that would be the first question I ask. So like you're making all these disqualifiers for something I didn't say, is my point.
Well, it's kind of like when we talk about.
I was just addressing Matt's question.
It's kind of like when we talk
No,
about
but
the
Matt
divine.
asked the question after you addressed mine, and I had no, like, that was why Matt had the questions, because of your response to my statements.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We have this recorded. We can play it back.
Well, I'm not arguing. I'm trying.
No,
yeah.
It was basically like, as an example, like we talk about divine counsel concepts, right? If I was at a church.
I'm sorry. I mentioned the divine counsel. We're at war with dark forces. Getting us to think the way we do is a tactic in the war that has debilitated us, and we have to fight back by getting past that. That's the point I was trying to make before. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we talked about this in the divine counsel, the idea, the whole concept of the divine counsel, in my mind, would not be a make or break determination on whether or not I thought a church was sound. I think they miss a lot of flavor, right? And they're missing a lot of context and a lot of things that could help with some of the understandings and teachings. And to the point that you just made about this, about the big picture, right? And the war of, to bring about the kingdom of God. But if a church was to say, hey, we believe all these things properly, except we have the Sethite view of what sons of God means, like that's not a deal breaker as a church to say that the church is theologically sound. Would it be my choice? No, because I would be too often bothered by certain reads and certain interpretations and whatnot, right? But like, it's not gonna say that everybody that goes to that church is not saved and is not a real Christian, because they misunderstand the interpretation of sons of God.
And that is everyone there? Are all the people unsaved? I think that's kind of, I think that's another part of the problem. Like we're evaluating things based on, are you going to heaven when you die instead of hell?
I knew you were going to say that, and that's not the point. The point is still salvation, though. Like that is still a component of what we're doing and what we're talking about.
What does that mean, though?
What do you mean? What does that mean? I'm not going to play your word game about fire insurance. Like we're on the same page on that. But my point is to say, if a person's not saved, that means they're not biblically, they're not spiritually in the right relationship with God, right? And
Right.
that's an indication of the church they're in and the path they're on. So it does matter. It's not about
Sure.
going to heaven, quote unquote. It is about going to paradise. And again, I this is where you and I wildly disagree. To me, it's word salad to a certain degree. Yes, it affects the path that a person takes, and it affects their passivity about their Christianness. So that part we agree on. But if a person misunderstands going to heaven versus going to Eden, like so what? Like that in the grand scheme of things is the last thing to sit and wring your hands about when there's such bigger issues afoot.
Well, but my point though is that salvation begins now. It's not a thing that happens when we die
Right.
or when Jesus
Agreed.
returns.
Agreed.
It's something that begins now. And if we have this kind of passive, as long as you believe the right things, you're guaranteed a trouble-free afterlife. That kind of misses the point of what the church is supposed to be doing now.
I agree with that. That's why I threw in the passivity part, because that is the issue, and that is why we're losing so much ground, big picture. And I agree with that part. And so to that end, I agree with your issue that you take about this one specific thing.
Well, that's why I asked, what do you mean by salvation? Because it's not, that's centered to the issue is, if we're teaching people a certain thing about salvation that is not focused on the here and now and our participation in the divine nature and escaping the corruption of the world caused by our appetites, then we have a simulacrum of salvation in
I agree
mind.
with that. I do agree with that, and that's why I hedged what I was saying on that point. But I think it's a different conversation. We should probably put a pin in that, because I think there's other ways to talk about that and address that. But we're way a field of denominations, because it's not like there's one denomination that teaches this part and everybody else is doing something different.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of we have so many denominations because we've kind of lost the plot, and so everybody is kind of divided on these peripherals. Um, so we're okay with all the denominations and the disunity because we think that we're united on the important stuff, which is going to heaven based on our faith, which is a Gnostic mystery token. Um, it, it's the system itself that our system is perfectly designed to yield the result that we're getting. Our system is yielding disunity and a dying church, because the center is it's built on a it's built on sand. It's built on a bad foundation. And I think the divine council worldview is a big part of the true foundation. I mean, if our sense of what the church, if our ecclesiology, our understanding of the role of the church is something other than taking the nations back from the false gods of the divine council, well, then we don't understand our mission. Um,
No, I have no problem with that. I think I agree with all of that.
okay.
Dre, thoughts?
Um,
You've been
no,
uncharacteristically quiet tonight.
none. Yeah, I'm just listening to the conversation. There's a few things that I think in future episodes I might get into. Just like maybe I don't agree with much of this, and I don't have anything specific that I'm
He
gonna
said,
point
"You
to.
you two are idiots. I can't even
Yeah,
begin to.
I don't even,
I can't even explain it tonight." Fair enough.
but
Or you're just
yeah,
reserving your right to bring it up later.
yeah, I think there's lots of denominations for the reasons that we stated, and
Yeah.
there's 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 forces at work that we cannot see that are kind of causing us to see these things, and and I honestly think that all these denominations aren't really that far apart. There's a few things that just need to get reconciled, and I think that instead of denominations, it's more like turfs. Like these are my people, and I'll have this little piece that's different because I need to get butts in these seats in particular.
I think there's small things that become big things, though. I think is part of the
Well,
problem.
that's part of our tribalism, right?
And
I think that we choose the wrong things to be up in arms about.
Yeah.
And we say, and I say that across the board in just life when it comes to culture and politics and stuff we argue about, sports, right? Like we're not that far apart, but we take a stand and double down on a couple of things that really in the grand scheme aren't that big.
Like Brian May's not really that good of a guitarist.
Yeah.
why are you doing that right now?
Because I knew it would get a response.
It's funny. I did go to the
So you
big
don't really
concert
believe that.
last Friday. I went to the Def Leppard, Journey, and Steve Miller concert.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot that live concerts are just for guitarists to show off. Because when I listen to Journey, let's face it, I'm not I'm not listening to the guitar. Like I notice it,
Sure.
right? But it's not a feature. That band is not a guitar band to me, right?
That's very fair.
But live, it sure as hell is. And the same with like, I'm there for the voice. And they
Yeah.
featured the
Yeah.
the Filipino kid, right? But I'm there for a couple of things, and then all that stuff gets kind of thrown in my face, and I'm like, oh well, this concert could have been about an hour shorter if the
Yeah.
guitarist would just
That's
shut
true.
the F up.
Yeah.
Same thing with the Hootie and the Blowfish concert. I'm like, you're not a guitar band either, Hootie. Yeah, but this
Okay.
guy's showing off awesome. And they,
Can,
they do all their different instruments too. I got it. You're a musician. You're
They
not
always
just the
got they
lead
always got to
singer.
intro the whole band,
Right,
right?
yeah.
And now the drummer, and you're
Yeah,
like,
right. So, but and to me, the substance of what that band is, the substance of what that church is, stop showing off your guitar and just tell me the basics. Right?
that's an
Just
interesting like takeaway. Stop with the guitar solos.
like
I have I have three quick points I'd like to make before we wrap, but I don't want to interrupt you.
okay. So to me, I think we're not that far apart, and I think the denominations are not that far apart. I think there are some basic things that we've spoken in depth on this podcast over the past year and a half that kind of the church needs to pay attention to, but really, yeah, everybody's kind of in the right. They're on our team, right? They're, these people are on our team,
I think that's an
and
interesting point. That it's hard to believe that one or many denominations are purposely trying to subvert the kingdom of God.
Yeah, it's not deliberate.
Right.
I would say that they're victims of
Sure.
spiritual warfare. And I like I'm just going to do a quick drive by of my 3 points, and
go ahead.
I think I'll be done. It's those things that that they agree on that are wrong. Um, and I think the divine council worldview is largely it's a corrective to kind of restore the plot. And I think if we recover the main plot, a lot of those other differences will take care of themselves or dissolve into triviality. Two, since Matt brought it up, Brian May, if you're listening, I don't know about these guys, but I'm on to you. I know that you are Isaac Newton, that you achieved immortality through your alchemy, and I want to know your secrets. Unless it involves eating pee.
I was going to say it probably has to do with John D. So I don't know if you want to know his secrets.
I just want to know the secret. But if it's eating pee, which is a common, that there's some lore around the universal solvent that involves distillation of pee. I don't care
Are you
about
talking
that.
about urine right now?
Yes,
Okay.
that's not. This isn't my thing. This is the.
It's going to be in the show
lore.
notes. Not really.
The waste byproduct of human function.
That's the thing. I'll send you a link.
Okay.
And the third thing, what was the third thing? Oh, so Jean Baudrillard hated The Matrix. because it didn't it he said they missed the point of his of simulacra and simulation, which is that, like in the Matrix, there's a clear distinction between the simulated reality and the real world, where they can escape into the real world and you know identify where the real ends and the simulation begins. And Baudrillard's view, since he's a nihilist, he, he was kind of a cynic and you know a somewhat despairing one. um his point was that there's no way to tell the difference. We are so steeped in our simulacra that we'll never be able to tell the truth, tell the difference between truth and reality. I mean, between reality and hyper reality. Um, the good news for us is that Baudrillard is wrong. God does exist. The gospel is true. We can discover that truth and escape from the simulacra of modern Christianity. But we have to be willing to sacrifice everything but the truth, which is nothing different than what Jesus taught. Anyone who tries to save his life will lose it. Anyone who loses a life for his sake will find it. If you love your parents, your family, your church, your theological system, your culture, your social identity more than him, you're not worthy of him. You can't be his disciple. And that's
was that reminds me of the meme that I saw that says, I've seen a lot of people leave their churches over politics, but I don't see many people leaving their politics over the church. That one kind of stings.
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little
So
bit.
my closing thought is, if the guys like Erasmus and Arminius and Tyndale and Calvin and Luther could see a reality where there was a podcast being shot into the world for free that could talk about the things that we could talk about, they'd think it was pretty dope.
That's a pretty good takeaway. And here we are.
Right? So if they would think it was dope, you should think it was dope.
You should think it's dope. All hundreds of you.
I think they would think it was a mixed bag, but
no, the broad.
No, they would
concept,
think we were wrong. But
right, they would all find something wrong about what we're saying. But the idea that we could do this, and then the Gestapo's not about to come through the door and put me on a spigot, or a spit.
Not yet.
They might, and
we'll see what happens in November.
Yeah,
I keep them things on me.
I do.
Everybody,
I think
stock up on ammo and canned goods and water.
I think we covered a lot. So if you're still with us at this point, if there's something that we covered that we didn't cover enough, like there's a point that you kind of wanted us to drill in on, hey, let us know. If you think that there was an entire waste of time and you can't believe you listened all the way through and there wasn't even anything funny or anything, then I don't know, tune in next week and shut up.
And if you're mad at me, come at me.
Right. Especially that. Come on, Brian. But yeah, we did cover a lot of different things and kind of didn't stay on one particular thing for very long, except for the Matrix or whatever. So if there's something you'd like us to drill in on, please give us some feedback, or if there's something you completely disagreed with, go ahead and shout that out too.
Oh, happy birthday, Corey.
Hey, Corey.
Hey, happy birthday.
Idea. Happy birthday. Very nice. So with that, I think I'll say, stay enlightened, stay curious, and we will see you next week. God bless.